Well, ladies and gentlemen, now in my official capacity as opposed to the admin brief, welcome to the 2025 Defence Reserves Association National Conference. It's wonderful to see a virtual full house, and of course remembering that we've also got several dozen people, virtual attendees, who will have the ability to ask questions and make a complete contribution during the conduct of the day. So wonderful to have all of you here as well in the virtual audience, so thanks for being here. I would have first like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the Indigenous custodians of the land on which we meet, and in particular, in the context of today's conference, I would like to acknowledge all those Indigenous men and women who have served alongside their fellow Australians over many years in the ADF. It's important that we remember their service. And if I might be so bold as to suggest that this acknowledgement of country and the custodians, whilst people will still do one for their own presentations if they wish, but I would like to think that this will suffice for the remainder of the day in terms of the appropriate acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. Since our last conference, inevitably, we've lost members of the association who themselves are veterans and who have served the nation. So in recognition of that, I would like those of you that can to stand while I recite the ode. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. The going down of the sun and in the morning we will remember them. Lest we forget. Thanks everyone. Well, I'd like to start by welcoming our significant guests, and I've already welcomed those that are participating online. I will obviously introduce presenters as we go, but I would just like to collectively welcome our senior guests and presenters collectively at this stage. First of all, I should note that we were expecting, and up until yesterday, we were going to have the Assistant Minister for Defence, Mr Peter Khalil, coming up from Melbourne to speak. Unfortunately, there's been a family issue down there overnight, and we fully understand, of course. Politicians are humans also, and they have families, and we understand entirely that he couldn't be here. But he did take the time to go into his electoral office yesterday afternoon and record a message, which we will hear from shortly. So great to have the Shadow Minister for Defence, Mr Angus Taylor, here. Thank you for coming. We also are hearing later from the Chief of the Defence Force, who also was locked in until he wasn't, and he's had to travel this weekend at relatively short notice, about a fortnight ago, but he was adamant that he have a message recorded personally from him rather than having a message delivered by someone else, so we've got that as well. I'd like to also welcome the representatives of our two close partners in the RSL and the Defence Force Welfare Association, Phil Winter and Del Gardry. Great to have you here today. We will, a little bit later, she will be here for the presentation immediately after morning tea, Lieutenant General Susan Coyle, Chief of Joint Capabilities, and Susan will be talking to us about the creation of a Cyber and Space Reserve. Great to have Major General Doug Laidlaw here, Head of Reserve and Cadet Support Division. Always wonderful to have you with us, Doug, as it is to have Major General Matt Burr, the Commander of the 2nd Australian Division. We have as well joining us shortly before lunch Alison Frame, the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is wonderful. It's been quite a while, I think, since we've had a Secretary of the Department here in person. And of course there's a range of topical issues which I'm sure you'll be gentle with Alison on in terms of things that are of concern to us as an association. The three service representatives, Commodore Ryan Gaskin, who will be with us, I don't think he's here just yet, but he's on his way, Brigadier Michelle Campbell, and also Air Commodore Greg Christina. And I should mention, and would be remiss of me not to mention, that it's wonderful to have the news over the last couple of months that Michelle is going to be promoted at the end of the year and will be taking over from Doug Laidlaw as the Head of Reserve and Cadet Support Division. So we congratulate you on that. That's great news. The other presenter we have later on today is Brigadier Mark Armstrong, the Adjutant General of Army Headquarters, who will provide, I think, a fascinating insight into the waxing and waning of the part-time component of the Armed Forces since Federation, and that will give us some good insights in terms of our final activity for the day, the workshop activity. I should also mention we have Colonel Ter Ewer, and he is the Reserve Forces Executive Officer of the Land Component, the New Zealand Defence Force, and it's wonderful to have a kindred and close partner here today. I'm not sure whether we've got anything to teach you guys. I mean, we work together a lot and we share the same issues, and the dialogue is a close and open one, and but it's wonderful to have a formal representation today from the land of the long white cloud. So welcome. We also, at some point during the day, I thought he might be here at the start, are going to be joined by Matt Anderson, who's the Director of the Australian War Memorial. Matt, of course, is a veteran himself. Before he went to DFAT, he's a Duntoon graduate and left as a major, a sapper, so that means he knows a few things. He's gone on to have a stellar career in DFAT, and now as the Director of the Australian War Memorial, is presiding, of course, amongst other things, over the creation of new galleries that will give a full and comprehensive overview of our post-Vietnam service, particularly those range of deployments starting in Timor in 1999. And I've spoken to Matt, and I know that he's very cognizant of the fact that part of that interpretation and explanation in those new galleries is to highlight the contribution of the reserve component to those deployments over that extended period of time. In some cases, the reserve, of course, formed the primary component, especially in the latter stages of our commitments in East Timor and the Solomon Islands. So fabulous to have Matt coming along during the course of the day. I would also just thank those who've come from a long way away. New Zealand I've already mentioned, but also in the other direction from Western Australia. Fantastic to have a strong contingent from WA, the current and former state presidents of the Western Australian branch, and also Commander and RSM 13 Brigade. So great to have them here along today. And of course, none of this would happen without the people who pulled it all together behind the scenes. So thanks to John Brennan and the other members of the New South Wales branch of the DRA, and our splendid cadets and their leadership team who have done a lot to make today happen. And given the strong views that we have around the connection between a positive cadet experience and future service in the ADF, it's an appropriate thing. Sean.
Sorry, I missed that. Was that
No.
those cadets, mate?
I'm talking about you, not to you. That's all right, unless you've got something to tell me. Okie doke. So yes, thanks to the New South Wales branch, to John Brennan, wonderful, and our erstwhile cadets. I'd also just like to thank Defence through Reserve Cadet Support Division for their generous support, which we receive for helping us in our endeavours, including this conference, and also Defence Bank for their sponsorship and support. It's the second year that we've received support from Defence Bank, so that makes it a tradition. So we hope it is ongoing forever after, and we'll work on that. I wanted to do very briefly, given that we now have a couple of recorded presentations and therefore a lack of Q&A at the end of those presentations, although I should say that the Assistant Minister for Defence wants to get together with me in his electoral office when I get back down to Melbourne after this conference, so that I can relay to him the issues and concerns that were raised, and I will take that opportunity up. So that's a good one. But it's given us a little bit of extra time at the start. So I'm going to take advantage of that and do something which hasn't normally been a feature of the conference, which is for the National President to make a bit of a stump speech around the things that we believe are of concern and the strong views we hold on a number of matters. And I won't bore you, and I won't take too long, but I think it's important that I cover a few things. An overview of 24-25. So our focus as an association, of course, is twofold. One, to advocate for and provide advice on how to optimise the utility and use of the reserve component of the ADF, and also to advocate for the recognition and support of our reserve personnel, both while they're serving in terms of their conditions of service, and also after their service in terms of the support they receive from, in particular, the Department of Veterans Affairs. Now, those two objectives have really not fundamentally changed over time, and I just happen to have here, one that I prepared earlier, a copy of our DRA history from 1970 to 2020, which was released only a year or so ago. A great read, gripping stuff, a real turn-pager. And you'll find in there the fact that those two themes that I've just mentioned have been consistent to varying degrees right from the start. And of course, the redoubtable Major General Paul Cullen, a World War II veteran who established the DRA, it's gone by different names over the years, but essentially the same organisation, was adamant about those two. This is still selling steadily. The New South Wales branch has copies available if you want to see John Brennan, so don't leave home without it. I should say as well that in effect, this also, for want of another history that covers the fortunes of the reserve component in that 50-year period, if you read the history of the DRA in that period, you come away with a pretty good understanding of the history of the reserve component in that same time frame. So it's valuable from that perspective as well. So they're the two things that we focus on. We have a federated structure. We have state branches who are active, in particular in terms of supporting their local constituency of reservists, but also in terms of running comradeship and support activities across a network, and that's vital work in terms of making sure our serving reserve men and women feel supported and acknowledged and appreciated. And at the national level, the National Executive, which is comprised of people like me and the Deputy National President, Ian Flouth, and also senior vice presidents from each of the three services. We also have the state presidents represented there. And of course, I welcome everyone from the National Executive and from the state branch leadership teams that are here today. It's great that nearly everybody was able to make it. The only place where at the moment, for reasons various, we don't have a strong active presence, a voice for the reservists in that state is in Tasmania, which is a bit of an anomaly given that of all the states and territories in the Commonwealth, it is in Tasmania where almost the entire ADF presence in that state is comprised of reservists. So we are working to fix that. We've got some discussions at the end of the year with kindred organisations down there, and we hope that we will, in one way, shape or form, reinvigorate that voice of the reserve in Tasmania. So that's a work in progress. In terms of our activities, obviously a big chunk of our time in the last couple of years reflected in the themes of the last three conferences, this one included, starting with Brisbane in 2023, was the Defence Strategic Review and what that meant for the reserve. And of course, at our 2023 conference in Brisbane, we already had the recommendation from the Defence Strategic Review that there be a review done into the reserve component. The then Chief of the Defence Force, General Angus Campbell, came and spoke, and he was very clear in exhorting us to make a fulsome and bold, I think they were his words, submission to the reserve review once it got underway. So having been given that encouragement by the CDF, we got on with it. And I'm happy to say, under the leadership of Doug Laidlaw and Air Vice Marshal Meredith, who was the co-lead, we had a very good hearing throughout the review process. We were the only organisation external to Defence that made a submission. I'm not sure whether other ones, if they'd made one, they would have been read, but we did, and it was. And then we had ongoing consultation throughout that review process. And so we felt well and truly engaged, and therefore a degree of buy-in from us, of course, in terms of seeing some of the themes that we'd raised reflected in the recommendations of the reserve review. And certainly it's fair to say that in broad terms, we as an association are supportive of those recommendations. We may have a varying view over the speed and size of some of those recommendations, but in broad terms, there's nothing there that we are certainly not opposed to, and believe that effectively implemented, they're all positives. Some of our other work, and of course I should say just before I leave that topic that at the end of the day there are a number of recommendations and we understand that not all of those can be implemented at the same speed and with the same degree of, I suppose, buy-in from across the defence enterprise. Some of them are very specific, others are very broad, and that will have an effect on how they can be implemented. However, what we do want to make clear is that we do support them, and we recognise, or we believe that as an association, probably some are more compelling and important in terms of their expeditious implementation than others. And so, hence the purpose of the workshop activity at the end of the day, to, having heard everything that everyone's going to hear today, have a group activity to try and give us advice as a Defence Reserves Association on what are the 3 or 4 most important recommendations that people believe need to be pursued by us, both in terms of their form and also their timeline. I'll turn then now briefly to some other things, and this goes to the second strand of our work. Access to non-liability healthcare and mental health access, in particular through the White Card. This is a crusade we have been on for some time, and we are unrelenting in our view that this is something that is an issue of equity and well-being and fairness, and that all reservists should have access to the White Card. And we've been joined in that crusade, if I might say, by the DFWA with Dell, and also Phil Winter, who I should have also welcomed formally. Phil, the CEO of the RSL at the national level. Great to have you here, Phil. And so we have put together joint submissions, and as well as that, both my predecessor, Paul Irving, and myself either gave testimony or made submissions to the Royal Commission into Defence and Veterans Suicide, and to that end, in recommendation 90 of the 122 recommendations of the Royal Commission, is a recommendation that that White Card access be extended to all reservists. Now, the government agreed in principle, which is not the same as agreeing to that recommendation, and the language around that agreement in principle was to further extend, which is not the same as provide access to all. So we're working that space, and I'm sure that the Secretary of the Department, Alison Frame, will have a couple of things to say about that. But we believe, as I said, that it is a fundamental thing, and it is tied to a related issue, which is the definition of the term veteran. Because that arises again and again in terms of words are important, and the definition of a veteran carries with it not only a sense of recognition and gratitude of the nation for your service, but it can also at times be used to determine eligibility of entitlements and access to services. We used to know what a veteran was. A veteran was someone who'd rendered warlike service. Simple. You either were or were not a veteran based on that criteria, and that was based around the 3 acts, which have now been blended into a single act, around, in particular, the Veterans Entitlements Act of 1986 and its antecedent legislation. So that's where we were. Then, under the previous government, at the time of, I think it was either Dan Tehan or Darren Chester being the Minister for Veterans Affairs, we came up with a Veteran Covenant, a good thing, which was broadly supported by the veteran community, which talked about a veteran being anyone who had served 1 day in the Defence Force. That also is simple and easy to understand. Plain English. Anyone who's served 1 day in the ADF. And we know that the ADF is an integrated force. It has a full-time component and a part-time component. However, once the bureaucracy got their hooks into this and it began to be an issue of eligibility and access, then we found that what 1 day service in the ADF really meant was at least one day of service in the permanent Defence Force, or if you're a reservist having rendered at least one day of CFTS, which is not the same as the words in the Veteran Covenant. And so we are at a point now where we are continuing to push for clarity. In our view, of course, it should be what the words say on the tin in the Veteran Covenant, which is all those who have served in the ADF are veterans. That is the only fair and equitable approach to take in terms of these things. And we do it not just for those who serve now and those who have served in recent times, but I should add that we are also doing it on behalf of the 35,000 national servicemen, and they were all men back then, who in the post-1965 National Service Scheme opted to do 6 years in the CMF, the Citizens Military Force, which was the antecedent body, same as the reserve now in terms of its concept. And those men, most of those men faithfully rendered their 6 years of service. But of course, the concept of continuous full-time service, or Serv-Op-C, didn't exist back then. And by its very nature, they were never called upon to render anything akin to that. So they also are excluded from access to the white card and non-liability healthcare, decades on from their service. That also is an injustice and an anomaly that should be corrected. So there are our positions on those key things. We work as an organisation through virtue of having a seat at the table of the ex-service organisation round table, which is a selected group of veteran and ex-service organisations and veteran support organisations are in that body, which advises the Department of Veterans Affairs on a range of matters, and that is chaired by the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, Alison Frame, who we'll hear from later. So through that representation on ESORT, we have input and influence, and we also have been involved in work flowing from other recommendations of the Royal Commission on the creation of an ESO peak body and also the creation of a Veteran and Family Wellbeing Agency. And we've worked again with our partners, in particular RSL and DFWA, on some of those things as well. And having been involved in the co-design workshop for the Wellbeing Agency, it's a classic example of where this definition of a veteran is such a fraught issue, because the first thing that people asked in the co-design workshop is, well, who can come to the Veteran and Family Wellbeing Agency for support? So who is a veteran? And would it surprise you to know that I couldn't get a straight answer from the DVA representatives that were there? No. So this is the issue that we need to get after. The Reserve Service Protection Act of 2001, which was a great piece of work by Major General Greg Gard, retired, an eminent jurist based in Victoria, a member of this association. That Reserve Service Protection Act is of its time, 2001. Our strategic circumstances were very different back then, and there is a piece of work going on again under the purview of General Laidlaw by Brigadier Nicole Longley in terms of having a look at the continued fitness of purpose of that Act. Most, in our view, broadly, I think the Act is still very sound, but of course it doesn't encompass forms of reserve service that are evolving now and into the future in terms of a disaggregated workforce, people with highly technical specialist skills such as in cyber and space, who may be connected to the Defence Force in some way. They may be rendering some form of reserve service, but the way in which we draw on them, the ensuring that we don't cut across other areas of national capability that are perhaps of equal importance as rendering a reserve service, all those sorts of things need to be contemplated in terms of a review of the Act. And of course it also needs to be done in tandem with the concurrent review that is going on of the provisions of the Defence Act of 1903, which has been reviewed and updated a few times since 1903, of course, but fundamentally that Act also needs to be looked at in terms of its alignment. Media and articles, well, we've been active in that front. We try and make headway in terms of getting our views aired and heard. We've had articles printed recently in the ASPI Journal, The Strategist, which you can find in their May edition online. You can have a look at that if you wish. We've had articles printed recently in the journal or publications of the Royal United Services Institute and also the Defence Force Welfare Association publication, Camaraderie. And also in a number of core magazines such as the Infantry and Armoured Corps magazines. I'm filling the time, aren't I? But I'm nearly there. But there is more work that needs to be done in a couple of key areas as well that I just want to mention. I think we still have a real issue in terms of the cultural blindness in the Canberra bubble of the reserve component. Too often, and we've all seen examples of this, too often we read both commentators and strategic experts and specialists who frequently appear in the media, and they talk about the ADF. But when they talk about the ADF, when you put it in the context in which they're talking, we know that they're only talking about the permanent ADF. Notwithstanding the fact that on any given day, 1/3 of the ADF is comprised of reservists. The machine would stop were it not for the reserve component. And it stopped absolutely in some key areas such as health and medical services support. So those people, not their fault, they're simply following the lead of the Canberra-led commentariat within the defence bureaucracy. Because inevitably there are papers that are issued time and time again, whether it's around conditions of service, whether it's around key strategic initiatives, that rarely, if ever, directly mention the reserve. And we simply have to correct this cultural blindness. We're very good at not being culturally blind in other areas, so I think it's high time that we became a little bit more aware of the contribution that the reserve component makes. The best example I can quote in recent times, and Del Gowdery highlighted this to me, and I went back and read the document just to double check, not that I ever doubt Del's view on anything. The National Defence Strategy of 2024. There is not a single mention of the reserve by name in that document. A lengthy tome. Now, it does mention the ADF, and if you were charitable, you could say, well, of course, if you mention the ADF, everyone knows that it's an integrated force, there's a full-time and part-time component, so we're really talking about, but no. If you read it in the context in which those terms are used in the document, especially when it's linked to numbers that are either extant or aspirational, you know that the authors of that document are only talking about the permanent ADF. So that's just one example. On page 30 of the document, though, there's a splendid photo of 2 Indigenous servicemen and women who must be from the RFSU, which is a reserve group of units, of course, under the 2nd Division. No mention of where they come from, and no acknowledgement of the fact that our Indigenous men and women in particular form a primary component, a majority component in a couple of those regional force surveillance units. So that's just one example, and I think it's an area that we really need to, and we are very vocal about it, but I think other people need to start to listen to that issue, because it does feed into the broader community understanding of how important the reserve is and how it needs to be supported and promoted. And finally, I will just say that we are also on about challenging a couple of hoary old chestnuts, and a couple of those are, this mooted link between paying tax and having super. And as we know, reserve service days are tax-free, and that's a significant incentive for many people. Different things for different people in different generations, but we're all about choice. And I think our view is that we support the current arrangements in terms of the tax-free status of reserve service days, but that does not mean, and we've had lots of eminent legal advice on this point, that does not mean that one can't contribute to super, or can't bring a super scheme with you and make a contribution to that. And that has been the source of advice from a number of people who are specialists in the taxation field, legally qualified people, and as well as that, it's also the point of wanting to incentivise the space where people wish to serve in another service category in a part-time mode after they leave what is called Service Category 7, which is the Permanent Defence Force. So all those people now in CERCAT 7 have, and I'm not talking about the old superannuation arrangements, the old defined benefit schemes like DFRDB and MSBS, but the contemporary defence super schemes are all ones that are essentially a commercial style product, and they are, or should be, eminently portable. So when you move across from CERCAT 7 to another form of reserve service, you should be able to take that super with you, and you should be able to continue to make a contribution to that super from your remuneration. So I will, in all those things that we do, and all of our advocacy and lobbying, an organisation is always going to be assisted by having a patron with profile and recognition and reach and some network. So in closing, I just say that we're very pleased that over the last couple of months we've persuaded our former Governor-General, His Excellency the Honourable General David Hurley, to become our patron. General Hurley wrote the foreword, so I had an in to talk to him about this. He wrote a very good foreword because he, obviously, in his capacity as a former Chief of the Defence Force, former Land Commander, etc., he had a great regard for the reserve and the capabilities that it was able to bring to the table. And so it wasn't a hard sell to convince General Hurley to be our patron. And I will take a couple of questions on what I've said at the very... Sir, you want to ask a question? Or you're bursting to make a comment?
Yes, sir. Crew Captain Pete Davis, I'm the Director of ADF.
Peter, hello. I didn't recognise you in your lilac. Sorry.
Just in support of your comments, just for the general audience, in the last financial year, reserves contributed 1.3 million RSD to the ADF, a further 1,400 Servox years, for a total output of nearly 7,000 permanent positions to the ADF.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's an extraordinary... As I said, the ADF, as we know it, would stop tomorrow were it not for the contribution of the reserve. It's as simple as that. So, great segue. Thanks, Pete. General Hurley is travelling abroad at the moment. He actually was already travelling when he accepted our invitation to become our patron, but he has recorded the message, and I'll ask Josh to play that for you now. Thanks, Josh.
Good morning. I was pleased to be able to accept the invitation of the National Executive of the Defence Reserves Association to become your new patron earlier this year. I'm sorry I'm unable to be at this important national conference, but I'm currently overseas fulfilling a commitment that was in my diary at the time I accepted the role. I look forward to attending the 2026 conference and to supporting the outcomes of this year's conference where I can. While Governor-General, I was asked to write the foreword of the 50-year history of the Defence Reserves Association. And in doing so, I was able to draw on my own encounters with the association and its advocacy, and particularly the impact of the redoubtable Major General Paul Cullen, a decorated World War II veteran. I'm pleased to see that this important book is now in print, as it's not just an account of the activities of the association between 1970 and 2020, but in many ways it's a history of the fluctuating fortune of the reserve component during this period. This story and its lessons are important to reflect on, never more so than at the current time. On any given day, 1/3 of the ADF are reservists, and they perform vital roles, not only in the day-to-day business of defence, but in providing essential capabilities without which the broader ADF cannot deploy nor sustain itself on operations. The Association is accordingly committed to taking every opportunity to press the case to government and the defence leadership for optimising the contribution and the capability of the reserve. The Association is equally determined to continue to advocate strongly for both appropriate conditions of service while serving and equitable treatment from Veterans Affairs after reserve service. Flowing from the Defence Strategic Review, the recently completed ADF Reserve Strategic Review is a focus for this conference, and it is to the credit of the Association that it was the only external organisation closely consulted by Defence during the review process and which made a formal submission to the review team. The DRA has strong state branches and a national executive that has deep experience and contemporary knowledge of the way the ADF currently employs the reserve component, and more importantly, what needs to happen to give more Australians the opportunity to bring their skills and commitment to Australia's Defence Force through reserve service. I look forward to my role as patron, and I wish the leadership of the Defence Reserve Association and all in attendance at this national conference a productive and enjoyable day.
Well, as I say, we're very pleased to have General Hurley as our patron going forward. And obviously I'll speak to him once he gets back about the outcomes from today and what he can do for us in the future. So with that, I'll close.